welcome everyone. My name is Jay Tucker, and I run the Center for Management of Enterprise and Media, Entertainment, and Sports here at UCLA Anderson School of Management. And I couldn't be more thrilled to start a conversation today that I think is near and dear to everybody's heart, right? Which goes to the question of how do we use data, how do we use experience to predict performance, and how do we think about leadership, right? It turns out that there are two incredible people for just this conversation. So I'm sitting down with Coach Brian Billick and James Dale, who are co-authors of a book called The Q Factor. You'll notice, for those of you who are joining, that I've put two links in the chat space for those of you who have questions or are interested in the book. There's a great overview from the publisher, and below that there's a link to where you can purchase the book if you're interested. But essentially, the book highlights the thinking and kind of analytical frameworks involved with selecting and predicting performance for quarterbacks. But there's a lot more there around how we use information, what some of the key traits of leadership are, and more. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, gentlemen, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So I have to ask, how did you get started here? How did we even end up with a book like The Q Factor? Where did the idea come from? What was the collaboration like? How did we end up with this in our hands?
Well, I've got to credit Jim for approaching me prior to the 2018 draft. And of course, I've been doing this my entire professional career. Jim's a huge Baltimore Raven fan and had tracked it through the years as well. And both the good and the bad, the trials and tribulations of trying to find a quarterback. So when he approached me before the 2018 draft and basically posed the question, and a very legitimate question, why do we get this wrong so often? When you think about the incredible amount of time and energy and resources that the league puts into identifying this all-important position, the most important position on your football team, to get a franchise quarterback, and to do so in the first round, it is at best, a 50-50 proposition. I'm living proof of that in terms of the difficulties we had in identifying a quarterback. And so Jim approached me prior to the 2018 draft because that, if you'll remember, was going to be a pretty large quarterback draft. The 5 individuals involved, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, Josh Rosen, of course, from UCLA, and Lamar Jackson, all with very diverse backgrounds, diverse skill sets. And so Jim approached me to say, can we, by way of looking at the 2018 draft, can we put some kind of structure as to why? I mean, in what world does, when you take a quarterback, not particularly this draft, but Trubisky, Mitchell Trubisky goes number 1, and Pat Mahomes and Deshaun Watson go 10 and 12. I mean, right. With all due respect to Josh Rosen, in what world does Josh Rosen get taken ahead of Lamar Jackson? So it's a very legitimate question. And so I give Jim, someone who's very intellectually inquisitive, and Jim said, let's talk about it. Let's investigate it. Let's use the 2018 draft and chart these guys as to why they are where they're at, why teams took them, how did they perform, and see if we can identify in making the process just a little bit better. Don't have to reinvent it. You just have to be a little bit better than that 50-50 average that's true throughout the NFL for the last 50 years.
So with that, and when I approached Coach Billick, he immediately said, yeah, let's go into it. Let's study it, because as he said to me personally, it's been frustrating, and for lots of coaches and lots of fans. And one of the interesting things here is we have no shortage of great quarterbacks. We have a shortage of the ability to pick who will be the great quarterbacks. It would be different if we went out every year and these teams picked quarterbacks and, we only had a handful who were successful over a 20, 30, 40-year period. But in fact, any football fan will tell you, there are some great successes that get either missed or misplaced in the draft. They're like a Pat Mahomes or a Deshaun Watson. So we said we're gonna try to study it and use the 18 draft class as a kind of a laboratory. And with this idea that with a little hope, a little more diligent application of intelligence and study, and what we came to, what Coach calls extrapolation, maybe we could improve that 50-50 to 55-45, 60-40 if we went really crazy. And because in the game of football, it applies elsewhere, but in the game of football, 50-50 won't get you in the playoffs. But one extra win during the course of a year could get you a wild card spot. And a wild card spot could get you pretty far in the playoffs. And a wild card spot could win the Super Bowl. It changes all the fate. It could. And then pretty early on, we started realizing that what we were studying were not just physical abilities, but mental acuity and this seeming intangible of leadership. And maybe if we were onto something, that it would be applicable in other fields, particularly business, but other fields as well. So that's what got us going. And we wrote, one other thing we would add is that, we wrote this over a period of 2 years, meaning we started with the draft, followed them for a year, then followed them for another year. We wrote it in real time, meaning we gave the assessments as we saw them at the draft, a few months later, into the season, next season. As tempting as it might be to go back and edit ourselves and say, we saw this coming, or we didn't see that come, or we saw that, we said, no, so if we said something that was dead wrong, it's in the book. If we made a pretty good prognostication and got it right, it's in the book. And I would say, spoiler alert, what we assembled as the Q factor worked. It did not blow it out of the water. We don't have an 80-90% formula, but I think it's safe to say we have an improvement on the previous coin flip.
Yeah, I asked. We did a podcast, a series of podcasts once the book was done, where I reached out to a number of Hall of Fame quarterbacks, general managers, alike, just asking about the process itself and looking at the book. Bill Polian said it absolute best. He said, "If I bat 500, I get fired. Okay, I just need to bat 525. I just need that little extra, because as Jim alluded to, that just that little bit more gets you that one more win, gets you into the playoffs, allow you to maybe make that run that allow you to extend your career." So that's the biggest thing. The biggest takeaway for me on the Q factor is, and a lot of it is common sense, but as we know, common sense always isn't common practice. And it's the application of the common practice and where the mistakes were made again and again and again that we can maybe learn from to just be that little bit better. I've been on both sides of it. Having the quarterback is a whole lot more fun than not having the quarterback. So just that little bit more can make a big difference.
And that's the thing too. It's funny because, there aren't too many head coaches that have actually won a Super Bowl, right? Because we only have one of those a year. And we have some folks that have been lucky enough to win multiple Super Bowls, and that's great. And folks who maybe have won multiple Super Bowls as a coach, not necessarily as a head coach, but with different organizations and so on. And Coach Billick, you've had a lot of success with a franchise that actually moved, that had a lot of other stuff going on and so on. And I suspect, and it comes out in the book too, when we talk about these characteristics, and I'd love you to walk through the characteristics in a minute, but first, the other confounding factor is environment, right? Exactly. We talk about these folks and their attributes, which you can certainly assess based on past data. But part of projecting into the future in terms of how the person is going to perform is, what's the quality and consistency of the coaching? And there are examples in the book of where the coaching situation, for example, for one person, their coaches changed a lot, right? For a lot of different reasons, but that person did not have consistent coaching throughout their early career. There's also the kind of alignment between quarterback, coach, general manager, organization, and whether or not you have the personnel around that quarterback so that they can actually leverage their talents to the fullest. There are things that you can kind of account for if that quarterback is given certain resources that complement their skill set. And so it's not just about telling people this is how you know who the best quarterback is. What I loved about the book is that there's kind of in this narrative style, you're talking about, okay, this is what you can know and what you can predict, and this is what I would do about it. And so then when I see your year later check-in and you're talking about, okay, well, this is what I think is going to happen or could happen, the caveats make sense because we start to see, well, actually, these are the things that the organization could do. This is what we heard they want to do. This is why we think A, B, and C. And I think that's a much more kind of nuanced and actionable way to assess performance generally. And I thought that was really refreshing. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about, you know, the art and science of thinking not just about the athlete, but also in terms of kind of the environment that you think they're going to end up in and how you connect the dots when you start thinking about whether or not this thing is going to work out.
Yeah, I loved your use of the term art and science because it's exactly that. It's a combination of, obviously we're in a huge world of analytics now. And everybody wants to moneyball the NFL. Ever since all that whole thing came out, the problem is it doesn't work for the NFL. The analytics are helpful. They can be hugely helpful. But because of the dynamic of the game, 22 guys on the field at a given time, 53 guys on a team, 32 teams, the cap, there are so many variables that statistically the game just doesn't lend itself as much. One of the reasons that made 2018 draft so interesting, you alluded to it earlier on, was the diversity of the personalities, the physical attributes, and the backgrounds of our ended up being five different quarterbacks, which made it an interesting laboratory, kind of, twins separated at birth, having the same opportunity, but obviously in different situations. And that's what made it interesting as well. Clearly, when we go through it, and again, it's very common sense, but there's the physical ability, just the physical ability to do the job. There's the mental and the emotional ability to handle stepping into the NFL and all the pressures and dealing with everything that goes on with playing quarterback in the NFL. And then finally, and very much so in the book, we evolve towards the environment, where they go, that marriage of the player and the organization, specifically the coach, is huge in terms of the success ratio. I always have jokingly, scouts will tell you, oh, no, he was a good player. Our coaches just screwed him up. And of course, the coaches are going to go, oh, no, we know what we're doing. He just wasn't a good player. So, the truth lies somewhere in between. But when we look at those main criteria, first, physically, I don't care. And certainly the league is replete, as I said, 50-50 at best, replete with examples of busts in the first round. And it doesn't matter whether it's a Vince Young, Jamarcus Russell, Harrington Carr. The list goes on and on. They all had the physical skills. None of them did we get into the league and go, oh, we're wrong. This guy can't throw. This guy's not big enough. He can't do what we physically thought he could do. That's just not the case. Mentally, emotionally, some guys handled it better than others. And that was, we talk about that in the book. And clearly that is a factor. A perfect example is Ryan Leaf, was someone who had all the skills in the world, but emotionally was going through a number of different things that he just couldn't make that transition. But then even more so, the marriage of the coach and the player and that environment, as we come to term later on, that culture, that match of that individual with the culture. We'll talk about it a little bit in more detail, but Lamar Jackson is a perfect example of the player with certain athletic abilities that went to the perfect place. Had Lamar Jackson gone someplace else, it could have been dramatically a different story. And so those three main criteria, and you're right. One of the keys to the Q factor is there are stereotypes that are made about some of these attributes that tend we kind of debunked some of them. The athletic quarterback, for one, that clearly the league is drifting towards that, but we've always valued an athletic quarterback. But the perception about an athletic quarterback and his ability to do it long-term and can it work has been changing. And so the stereotype that was very, very real and was a stereotype because for a long time it was very true in terms of the shelf life of that type of quote unquote athletic quarterback is beginning to change. So therefore our view and the field of athletes that we're looking at for this unique position is beginning to grow because of it.
Love it. And Jim, I feel like to make this happen, you had to start with some specific hypotheses about what you were going to look for and talk about.
We had some, we let me put it this way. Yes, we had some hypotheses. We were perfectly willing to throw them out. We were trying out thoughts. I mean, a good example is the one coach just talked about. There's common commentary from pundits and experts is that about the mobile or athletic quarterback might be very good, can't last because he's making himself a target. He's running and he's going to get hit. He's going to, get hit. His knees are going to go out, various kinds of injuries. So we said, well, maybe that's true. Maybe it isn't. Maybe these guys don't last. Maybe they don't last for other reasons. So we started to dig into it. And one place that was a very, very interesting place, we went to a company that's been studying just that. They study other things too, but they delved into the sort of longevity and health of mobile quarterbacks versus pocket quarterbacks. What I'm about to say doesn't mean that one is better than the other. What it demonstrated to us is that you can succeed. You can stay healthy and be a mobile quarterback. And you could stay healthy and be a pocket quarterback. Conversely, you could be a mobile quarterback and get killed. And you could be a pocket quarterback and get killed. It has a lot to do with how smart you play that position. So, for example, certainly a very successful quarterback we've seen over the years, who's not much of a runner, is Ben Roethlisberger. He tends to plant himself in the pocket. Like they say, Big Ben, and he's a statue. He's gotten hurt a lot, as big and strong as he is, because as we went to this company revealed to us in doing their research, think about it this way. If you have to hit a target, would you like to hit a moving target or a target that's standing still? So if you can get to Roethlisberger, you might be able to take him down. If you take him down too many times, he could get hurt. He's chosen to play the game that way, and by and large, it's worked. Tom Brady's a pocket quarterback who has not been hurt much, I guess once or twice badly, but pretty much. So then you look at the mobile quarterbacks, and it turns out there is, I think it's a 0.01% difference in the amount of serious injury to mobile quarterbacks.
That's all.
And the reason, that was not applied by, as coach said, the old scouts saying, chewing the tobacco and saying, hey, here, this guy's going to get hurt. The reason actually makes sense. It's the flip side. Would you rather try to bring down somebody moving or somebody standing still? And the quarterback who's on the move knows he's moving. He knows what he's doing. He said, I'm taking off right now. If you can coach him a little bit to slide or get out of bounds when he needs to, after he's picked up the first down, don't be so heroic. Then you can keep that guy going. Now, there are some quarterbacks that are never going to do it. They're going to just keep on running, and that's, and they may become targets. But what we learned, that's a long way of saying what we learned, is that was a myth, the mobile quarterback. What's not a myth is how easy it is to get hurt in football. So let's be smart. There were many other things. I used that one because it's rather interesting. Another one of great interest was, of course, one we've known for years, but is just beginning to come to light, is the inability of the NFL to accurately assess intelligence. And they use a Wonderlic test, which everybody roundly agrees is no good, but didn't really have a great replacement for. And one of the guys we talked to said, look, the problem with most intelligence tests, is they measure accumulated knowledge, not the ability to process information. So you stop right. The guy said it to me one day, and I just sort of stopped cold. So he got me. I understand immediately. He said, if you do really well on the SATs, you've accumulated a lot of knowledge. And he said, and we're not putting that down, but it does not tell us how fast you can process information. But a fighter pilot, when you analyze their success ratio, that may tell you more. So two quick examples.
No, but I want you to elaborate on that second example because it's in the book, right? You went to those folks to find out how they assess decision-making amongst fighter pilots, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it's very, very akin to what a quarterback does. They discovered a couple of interesting things. The most successful fighter pilots, that is, hit their targets, either in a simulation or in reality, move their eyes less. Think about that. So they have to see two fields of vision. They have to see out and around them, and they have to see the instruments. So you'd think, well, maybe the most successful fighter pilots move their eyes the most and the fastest. But in fact, what they discovered by doing pupil tracking is that they take in more in a shorter arc of their eye movement. And the most successful quarterbacks tend to move their heads around less, but see more. It's not that they're not taking it in. Now, the ones who get clobbered may or may not move their heads around, but they're not taking in the information and they're not processing it quickly.
The best analogy to the game, and those that are listening will be readily remember, people constantly refer, you hear quarterbacks say, well, the game slowed down for me. There comes a point where a quarterback, you hope fairly early in his career, Bill Walsh firmly believed that you'll know on whether a guy's a franchise level quarterback or not by about the 24th, 25th, 26th game, about the middle of the second year. You may find earlier, it may happen earlier, but if it's not by then, it's probably not going to happen. Of course, there's exceptions to all of it. So you hear young quarterbacks or quarterbacks that have reached a certain level of success say, yeah, at this point, the game slowed down for me. Well, the game didn't slow down. It didn't physically get us slower. What Jim's alluding to is what happened for them is they had the ability to process what was going on much more quickly through recognition, through experience. And they do have to have that vision to recognize very readily what's going on around them. And then what can I do about it? And some guys don't. They can see it. They can get on the board in the meeting with me and explain exactly where the safety is on this defense and what that means here and there. But then they get onto the field and they don't process it quickly enough. I've also had quarterbacks who really struggle in a meeting or to get on the board. I'll tell you a perfect example, Steve McNair, God rest his soul. I loved having Steve McNair. Now, this was a veteran quarterback that was extremely accomplished. And I found out early with Steve that if you sat in a classroom and put it on the board and tried to take him through it, he didn't quite process it that way. In fact, I told the coaches, just stop doing that, okay? Because this guy, but what he could do is he could get on the field, and when he saw something happen, his ability to see and his experience said, well, if this happens, then I know I got to go over here. Now, I don't even know that he could fully explain it in a way that you'd normally, okay, when they're in a cover three and the safety drops the offside corner, but it's just like, well, when I kind of see this, then I know this is open. And it's just the way he processed things. It goes back to what we're talking about, the different tests and the wonder. I stopped even looking at the Wonderlic tests with players because at one point I gave it to my coaches. And when I saw those numbers, I thought, no, this, I don't want to look at this test again because, it's not accurate in terms of what we're looking for. Because guys, and you then begin to learn very readily that guys process things differently, not always better and sometimes not good enough, but you can't just be dismissive because a guy can't sit in the classroom on the board and then tell me exactly what every component of a cover 3-4-3 defense is.
So that's it certainly is applicable, I think, to the beyond the football field. You can see where that could be applicable in the business world as well, because the ability to evaluate, call it sort of business savvy or street smart versus classroom smart. They're not opposite, but they're not this, but they should be complementary. And I think we lost you there for a minute, Jay.
Yeah. Sorry about that, but continue, please.
So, well, just the idea that those characteristics can be complementary. The coach talked earlier, and you talked also, Jay, about environment, and certainly there's a great parallel to business, because a boss, a CEO, a leader goes into a company, and that company has a culture, and it's not likely to change radically just because that CEO says so. It might over time. Or that CEO or founder goes to a venture capital firm to get backing. So the match is all important. There's a classic case study done that your students may be aware of, that years and years ago, in Steve Jobs' first iteration at Apple, he had great success, and then he stumbled, and the board said, "You're out of here." And they brought in one of the great CEOs of the time, the guy who had been leading all of the expansion at Pepsi, John Sculley. Brilliant, brilliant guy. Came into Apple, which was a company built on innovation, fast response, and anticipation, not just response, anticipation of what the marketplace would need. Failed miserably. Absolutely failed miserably. Was John Sculley a dumb guy? No, he's a really smart guy. But there was a bad match. A really bad match. They ended up going back to Steve Jobs, who might have been a little bit more mellow at that point, although it's hard to imagine him mellow. And that was a better match. And the board had to flex with Steve Jobs. So the board had to flex with Steve Jobs in the way coach says, when a coach says, "I'm going to embrace this guy's abilities instead of try to cram him into a system that doesn't work," you got a better chance if the team embraces the abilities of that guy and builds around him. And it's certainly parallel to business.
Now, I think there are tons of parallels, and I want to level set here because that's a perfect transition point. You've articulated in the book this approach to looking at
You're frozen there. I don't know if we can.
Can you hear me?
Now you're back.
Kind of froze on us there for a second.
Okay. Sorry about that. Can you talk a little bit about the way you see analytics as part of the prediction process, and how that informs your thinking?
Yeah, and I'm very much one that started early. I don't want to sound like I'm Al Gore here and I invented the internet, but I think I'm the first coach that ever used PowerPoint to present a game plan. This goes back to the mid 90s. And I had always used my brother's an engineer and got me started on computers early. So I always found it a very helpful way to process the data and start to do some things. Actually wrote a game analysis program with a gentleman when I was at Utah State. But so I've been very much one that is on the edge and very much willing to embrace the analytics. So once that began to happen, where a lot of coaches are, no, I can't, if they'd still be using a rotary dial phone if they could find one, they just, no, I'm not going to get into this new stuff. So I was always one that embraced it. But you realized, and I realized very early, part of the issue or part of the thing you had to discern was, okay, this is all very good, but what's actionable? What of all the mass information that we can produce can I actually use either in preparation for a game or within the body of a game? I always only half jokingly said there used to be a guy, some MIT digitomo that came up with a quantitative theory that said you need anything less than 4th and 2, you need to go for it. And over a certain period of time, you would benefit, and which mean X amount of points and X amount of games and whatever. And it was all very, very good. But the problem was, I always said, okay, well, when I go for it on 4th and 1 on my own 20 against Pittsburgh and don't get it, I want that guy standing on the sideline next to me, because I want everybody to know whose idea it was for us to go for it on 4th and 1. The analytics has to be used within the context of your institutional knowledge as to what is applicable, what's not, how can I use it, how do I disseminate it to my players in a useful way, that is very functional, as opposed to just throwing a mass amount of data at them. And there's coaches that would do that. And you tell a player, okay, in this situation, they're going to run the ball 64.3% of the time. Okay, what do I do with that? Now, if you can tell me they run it 80%, 85, not okay, now I can plan and execute something and play the odds in that way. But when you throw, it's great that you can identify it in that specific detail, but that's not actionable for me. So we're still going through a little bit of that with the analytics, and a lot of it particularly with quarterbacks, because the hardest thing in applying analytics to quarterbacks is, it's like like the old saying, my typewriter can't spell. Okay, well, garbage in, garbage out. If we, I'll explain it this way. If the three of us were to list the top 10 quarterbacks of all time, between the three of us would probably come up with 14, maybe 15 different names. If we were then to say, okay, let's quantify what made each of them a Hall of Famer. What made each of them great. The subtleties of difference between the unbelievable quick release of a Dan Marino, the pocket presence of a Joe Montana, the pure stroke of a Warren Moon, the sheer physical style of a Steve Young or a Troy Aikman. Each quarterback obviously has to have a core set of abilities, but in such varying rates. I use the analogy that when you hear a great piece of music, when that piece of music's being produced, and you see one of these engineers on these huge boards that affect the treble and the bass and all the different things that go into the music. Well, those settings vary from one song to the next, from one type of music to the next. So to say, okay, this type of music, it's these kind of settings, and that's what's successful. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. Each artist, each tune is unique in itself. Each quarterback's the same way. So it's very hard from an analytical standpoint to say this is definitively the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 attributes in exactly this proportion is what makes a great quarterback. It's too much of a moving target.
And the thing is that I find interesting is that obviously people like you who've made it their business to try to identify talent, over time you train that muscle and you have a great eye or a great gut, right? And I think to your point about Moneyball earlier, that the conversation kind of moved in the wrong direction, in the sense that people started to ask the question, is the kind of eyeball test the way, or is analytics the way, as opposed to thinking of, well, if I've got somebody who's a great evaluator of talent and I enhance that ability with analytics, what can we get, right? You have a great gut. What can we do when we give you a bionic gut, right? We just, right? And I think that we start moving in that direction and you start having much more constructive conversations. You mentioned actionable insights. And I think that's the key part of this. One of the things that we've learned with the folks who are real stat heads is that some statistics admittedly are for show. They don't actually lead to success in any meaningful way. They're a great way for people to kind of make comparisons, but it's really for conversational purposes, right? It doesn't mean that the athlete hasn't achieved that on the field. It just means when we talk about overall their success, which ultimately is, their team winning a game, those are things that aren't necessarily going to fall into place as the key metrics. And we start to do a better job of identifying things that are more important. That said, taking a number and using it by itself in isolation as a way to predict what you should do is probably not going to work out, particularly with a sport that employs 30 to 40 people in any game and has a roster of 60 people, with other folks on the practice squad and all this other stuff who can be used at any time. And then dealing to your point about context, situations where the risk assessment changes the value of the analytical insight, right? That you have this much more complicated landscape to deal with. That said, I'd love it if you could talk more about like this question of, so we have more data now. What data is useful to you?
Yeah.
right? Like what do you find is actionable for you?
And just as a side note, it was interesting when I was coaching at Stanford University. Um, Part of your job is you present the athlete to the admissions board. And as we know, particularly a place like Stanford, the admissions board is like Supreme Court justices. Once they're there, they're untouchable. I don't care how much you donated to the university or what your legacy is. If you're either in or out based on what the admit. So a lot of your recruiting job was to sit and present these athletes. And I found it interesting. And obviously, it was a wonderful institution, one that prides itself on bringing in the complete individual beyond just what the test scores say. But I also found that as I would present athletes, and you present their story and their backstory and what makes them, why you're advocating they would be a good fit for the university, that when push came to shove, that was so hard to specifically identify and articulate that I found the admissions board, when push came to shove, if there was a kind of a jump ball, they would then lean towards the quantitative SAT, ACT, GPA, the more okay, I can put a number to this, so I'm more comfortable in making the call. When it comes to the athletes themselves, like I said, there's got to be a certain core ability, and there's a certain, experience where you look at it and say, okay, yes, I've kind of seen this before. I think right now, the vogue thing in the league in terms of the minimums that you're looking at in a quarterback, one is, like we said, there's a certain core athletic intelligence, which again is hard to quantify. Does this guy, is he a baller? Is he the kind of guy that just loves to compete, throws himself? He's going to be, he was a kid in high school who had the keys to the gym because the coach just said, hey, I'm tired of keeping up with you here. You come and go as you please. Does he apply himself that way? The 60%, and we talk about it in the book specific to Josh Allen, below 60% completion. The history of an athlete in college that is below 60% is not good in the NFL. It's not like he's going to get better. The athleticism, not necessarily meaning his ability to run, which is nice, but the athleticism in the pocket. Patrick Mahomes is a different quarterback because of that athleticism compared to Lamar Jackson, who's a phenomenal runner on the outside. There's a subtle difference. Both can beat you. But we also found that, there has to be a certain core athleticism. Doesn't mean they run a 4.40. Doesn't mean, they're going to be a great runner. Baker Mayfield was a perfect example of a guy who was a very good athlete in college and had a lot of yards running. But you recognized he's not going to be able to do that in the NFL. He does able to move around the pocket. He has that kind of athleticism, but he's not going to run the ball like we see a Lamar Jackson or Deshaun Watson or something like that. So identifying and quantifying that athleticism, I think, has become very, very important rather than just the generic, okay, he can run with the ball or he can't. It's long been the adage, you can't win with an athlete who can throw. You've got to have a quarterback, a thrower, who is also maybe an athlete.
So you get, one of the things that you get here, Jay, is that analytics that matter most are the analytics that interact with other analytics. So you have to put things in context as well, just like we said, just like putting a player with a coach. So like Coach referred earlier to, I think it was the MIT guy who said, if it's less than if it's fourth down, less than 2 yards, go for it. Okay, well, that's, that's a statistic I'm sure he could prove in isolation. Here's why. Does that mean that there's no value to the path he started to go down? No, he just had it. It was incomplete, because today you see, because of that piece of data interacting with other pieces of data, we now see teams going for it on fourth and short much more often, not at the 10-yard line, not at the 20-yard line, maybe not at the 30-yard line, other than late in the game when, of course, you go for it to try to pull the game out. But what we're seeing is if you watch Sunday to Sunday and listen to the commentators, they're going to say this team can go for this at the 50-yard line or even their own 45 because of what they can do, of the weapons they've got, and this other team can't. Okay, so they are feeding in other analytics to that. Is it true that you could go for it on 4th and short more often than teams used to? Yes, if you have the weapons. If you don't, then you should follow the old wisdom and punt the ball.
Yeah, it
So,
might be informative to answer your question directly about, as I'm thinking it through, most specifically where I ended up using analytics the most. I use the analogy, the combine. And for those that aren't familiar with it, you bring the top 350 football players into the combine in Indianapolis, and you weigh and measure and interview and poke and prod and put on the field and do all this kind of stuff. Like analytics, that has a place and a value, but the biggest mistake is to fall in love with a guy in shorts that then it doesn't show up obviously in the game. And here's what the combine did for me, and this is where I ended up using analytics the most. At the combine, I would go in and it was basically a litmus test that if I liked what I saw on film in my analysis and I go to the combine and the guy's running around and it matches, great, check the box, I'm good to go, it all adds up. Or I didn't like this guy, I see him in person on the field moving around, I don't like him, great. The difficult one was I like the guy on film and I get to the combine and I don't like what I see in person, or vice versa. Didn't like the film so much, but boy, this guy's a heck of an athlete. Well, what the combine did for me was send me back to the film. It was that much more data that said, okay, I got to go back and reevaluate what my perspective was because maybe I missed something. Analytics is the same way. Instead of giving me a hard, fast, this number is going to help me win the game, with the proper analytics, it will make me question an assumption or validate, okay, I think this could be helpful. Now I've got to do the practical work of go back to the film, go back to the game plan and say, can I use this? Yes, I can. And now put it into the game plan. And again, it's very rarely a lightning bolt of inspiration. Oh, this is a hard fast. It's, oh, gee, this is interesting. A perfect example, Lamar Jackson. Eric DaCosta told us that one of the things that sold them on Lamar Jackson, they liked what they saw. They still had some stereotypes about him getting hurt and they're not sure. But Eric said, I really liked the way the guy worked under pressure, particularly under blitz. And then I saw a report, an analytics report that gave a specific rating to him versus pressure, more than 5 guys pressuring in critical situation. They quantified it, put a score in whatever versus others. And for Eric, that put him over the edge. That bit of analytics, along with the practical perception, said, oh, that's what I thought I saw. Great. Here's some hard data that validates that. I can now go sell that to my general manager and head coach.
Jay, one of the things that I learned in the process of doing this and working with Brian is what he just illustrated, this go back to the film, go back to the data. If there's a secret, if there's a formula for predicting better, it's no surprise it's better homework. It is what Coach Billick calls extrapolations, which means you don't take any piece of data in isolation, because a guy comes along and he sends your film, or his coach sends you film and it's highlights, and the guy looks fantastic because at that moment in time he was fantastic. They didn't put special effects into the film. At that moment in that game, he did this, and it's like, oh my God, as a fan, as a guy sitting at home, great. But it doesn't tell you anything unless you see that he can do that kind of thing over again, over again, over again, and he could do things similar to that. And so what Brian Billick brought to this process that I think is underutilized because it's tedious work is go back to the film. We even said, if you've got a kid coming out of high school and then going into college, and you're looking for characteristics of leadership, there is what we called sort of the game film of life. Go dig deep into this kid's life. not the one best friend who says he's the greatest guy I ever knew, but coaches on the high school team, teammates, over and over and over again. What you saw in college. Did he get in trouble? When he got in trouble, what did he do? Did he find a way to straighten himself out? Did he recognize his mistakes, or did he compound his mistakes? Did people like being around him? Did the team rally for him as behind him as a leader, regardless of whether he was a screaming leader or a quiet, cool leader? Did they rally behind? Over and over and over? And that's, for lack of a better word, that could be boring to dig through that stuff. But that's where you find, to bring it full circle, that's where you find that Lamar Jackson performs his completion percentage under pressure, or his success percentage under pressure. That doesn't pop to the surface. You got to dig for that.
So that's where I think there's these incredible parallels with thinking about leadership in the business sector, because we have also lots of conventional wisdom about what we think makes a great leader. And unfortunately, and I think this is true to a certain degree when we talk about football as well, that we forget sometimes in the way we narrate about the success of a company, we often kind of focus on an individual. You mentioned John Scully earlier and talked about the match between what was happening at Apple, the culture at Apple, and then bringing him into that environment. Typically, we just say, oh, well, John Scully, he just wasn't the right dude. He doesn't have the talent. When he was at Pepsi, he couldn't do anything wrong, right? So we, I think, are often challenged when we look at leaders and try to assess their potential. We don't necessarily do the digging that you're talking about. And what I found interesting, the two elements, you've already kind of talked about each of them a little bit. The one was getting into the backgrounds of folks and thinking about, well, how do they respond to adversity? And the second one was this thing with the pilots and actually thinking about how decision-making actually works, particularly kind of how people take in information and then process it. But I think those kinds of anecdotes across the book and the things that you've been discussing today indicate that there is a way to start talking about leadership in context and being able to predict whether or not folks in certain roles are actually going to be able to add value to an organization and bring people along with them and influence them and make the right decisions with the information they have and so on, right? I think there's some examples that you point to in terms of how we should be looking at talent more generally. And then, of course, there's the meta narrative, which is, what do we do with information? And I love what both of you said about this kind of, well, look, when the certain data comes out that surprises you, that doesn't agree with what you understand in the moment, you go back and look again, right? I think both of those ideas, like what do we do in terms of assessing, retaining, promoting leaders who have potential? And then also, how do we use data if we're in leadership positions? I think both of those things came across in the book as ideas that we can use much more broadly.
It was interesting that one of and we alluded to it earlier, how, obviously very important, the quarterback going to the right place. We talked about Lamar Jackson. Because of the circumstances, they were successful. If you're taking a first-round quarterback, particularly early in the draft, you're probably doing it because you're not pretty good. So by definition, a young quarterback goes to a team that's not very good. And that's part of the growth pattern as well. Lamar Jackson gets picked in the 32nd pick by Baltimore. They trade back in the first round to get him, a very good football team that didn't need a quarterback. They just saw an opportunity to get a good athlete. That gave him growth to work without the pressure of having to be the guy right now under Joe Flacco. But they did so recognizing that if we go with this young man, we're going to have to totally change the way we do some things. And then there's the tough decision. Is he good enough for us to do that? That's where now in the post-Lamar Jackson era, you have a lot of teams that are going, oh, gosh, go get me a Lamar Jackson. Well, hold on. There's not all those cats running around, okay? This is a little bit of a unicorn. So what do? You convince yourself that, well, someone kind of like him can do the same thing. Where the disconnect comes is where you may commit to that, but you don't commit to the change of the organization, the culture around it to fit. We always talk about that culture fit, and that we've been saying all along with the examples of Apple and Scully that, okay, maybe it was the right guy, it was the wrong fit. I think part of the problem in the NFL is not that they're not properly identifying the skill set of the individual, but they don't have a clearly defined culture that they're advocating. And so no matter who comes in, it just doesn't quite work because they think they do, but they don't. It was fascinating for me when I was doing games for Fox, and for imagine the business analogy. Every Friday, I would go into a new team's facility, watch practice, visit with the coaches. Imagine in the business context, you get to sit in the board meeting of your top competitors and get to do that for a year and to see how they operate and what goes on. You'd come out of it, very informed and be able to have a better business because of it. And I learned a great deal, but it was amazing. I could walk into a building and tell you in the first 15 minutes whether it was a winning environment or not. Whether it be the receptionist at the front that let me in, the attitude around the practice, the players, the energy level, the way they talked about one another, the way they talked about their team, the definition that the coach, and is the coach seeing the priorities the same ways as the players? It didn't take long to recognize why one team was doing well and another wasn't. And it comes back to the fact that it wasn't so much that maybe the player didn't have the right fit for the culture. They didn't know what the culture really was. So they obviously didn't know how to make it work.
So I had a boss when I was very early in my career. I think I was still in my teens, who used to say everything communicates. And so that definitely resonates with me when you say you can walk into a place and in 5 minutes you kind of have a sense of the culture. But I would say, as somebody who's had some success and has had some winning cultures around him, like, what are some of the things that tell you, oh, this team might be special? Like, this is the right kind of culture. How do you know, like, if in 5 minutes, what are the things that you pick up, talking to the receptionist, that tells you that, like, this is an organization I can mess with?
Yeah, it was interesting, and it varied, obviously, but I'll share a story with you. So I'm doing a game with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I'm Baltimore Raven head coach. You talk about the ultimate rivalry. I can't believe I'm walking in to the Pittsburgh Steelers practice facility and I'm going to watch practice. So I walk in, and they're on I think the southeast side of the city, a new practice facility. And I walk in, and the receptionist is sitting there at a desk in a room, no pictures. No, I mean, it's just a gray, ugly. I felt like I was walking into a barracks in a military base. And I'm thinking, dang, man, throw a little coin out here, put a picture out or something.
Right.
And so I go in and I introduce myself, and she goes, yeah, they're expecting you. You can go up the stairway there and up to the main level. I said, thank you. So I walk up, and you go up the staircase, you make the turn, you come up, and up at the top, there was a case with the 6 Super Bowl trophies. I thought, okay, I get it. Yeah. You don't need the pictures. They have defined. I remember there's a story when they won their first one. Art Rooney came in after they won the Super Bowl. And the receptionist was answering the phone, world champion, Super Bowl world champion, Pittsburgh Steelers. And he said, young lady, just answer the phone, Pittsburgh Steelers. They know world champions. And if they don't care you telling them. Okay. So just answer the phone, Pittsburgh Steelers. So there's an example of an organization that has a very well-defined sense of who they are. And it permeates down from the ownership all the way down, and the way you conduct yourself. And so that obviously is an extreme example. To me, the biggest determiner was when I walked in, the energy in the building, again, from the receptionist. Was she energetic, or was she just pounding the time clock? The PR guy, watching the players move around from meetings to practice, watching the coaches, they dragging themselves from meetings to practice. When they sit with you, is it just like, oh God, when can I get out of here? Are they animated about what it is, the game they're about to play in? And are they animated about the players? Just that energy level. And a lot of it, obviously, it's a long season, and particularly at the end of the season, if things aren't going well. But I found I used to do a great deal of corporate speaking, and found the same thing when I would go in and be around 400 or 500, 600 of the top executives or selling personnel or whatever. What kind of energy did they have? What were the conversations about off when someone was on and I'm in the back room and just listening? How were they interacting with one another? Was there energy and buzz within the organization, or were they just there pounding the clock because they were supposed to be? If there's one thing, it's that energy level of wanting to, and not the least of which is, tell me more. I want to learn more. I don't understand this. Their willingness to ask a question, well, rather than just, you throw something out and people, oh yeah, okay, now maybe they don't know, no, maybe they don't know, but the willingness to go, well, I didn't understand what you just said. Explain that to me. Go into that in more detail, because they wanted to know. Just little stuff like that.
Right. All right.
We have an interview coming up with a guy on a podcast who's one of the leaders of one of the most successful venture capital firms in the world. And we talked to him about how they evaluate where they're going to put millions of dollars on the table. And he said something very similar to what Brian just said, that they do two things. They invest in the person, that is, who's the founder or co-founders, and they try to go to the facility, to wherever they work from. And he said, it's funny because you go to some really crummy looking places because these companies were started on a shoestring. And he said, and then you go to some pretty cool looking places. He said, but it has very little to do with how they look. It has to do with the energy. And you start talking to people there. Are they excited about what they're doing? Are they pessimistic, optimistic? He said, they've all been through hell. They're all facing difficult challenges, but with a hopefully brilliant idea behind it. And you can gauge that energy level and that dedication in the rooms, regardless of what the place looks like. It's sort of like the Steelers facility. You could just have just those 6 trophies. That's enough. You don't need a fancy paint job. And he said, you invest in the person and that energy level.
I love that comparison, because I feel like within the early stage venture arena, you have a lot of people. This goes back to what both of you were talking about earlier. Nobody starts a business without vision, talent, and drive. Those are table stakes, right? Those are the physical attributes of a quarterback, right? Like, nobody starts a business without, but the idea that the organization is going to be successful depends on a bunch of other factors. And certainly culture is one of them, right? And you can walk into, some people literally are starting businesses out of their garage, but you can walk into that garage and see already that, like, yeah, that's going to work out. And other folks who have been extremely well funded, and I won't name names, you can walk into their facilities where you recognize that, like, yeah, I don't think these folks are going to, they don't have the desire and the focus that's going to be required for them to survive the next 3 years so that they can actually do the thing that they said they want to do. And I think with whether we're talking about business or football, I think that holds that, you have to be able to influence the organization around you. You got to be able to make great decisions, but the passion has to be there too.
Right.
This thing about, like, opening up the gym, right? Because, like, woof, I can't even keep up with you anymore. You have so much passion that, I just need to let you in the facility. That, I think, is what you need to see across business generally, because doing something different, which is what's required to create value, requires that passion, and the people around you feed off that.
And
passion.
you have to be open-minded about the way you assess passion. Some people scream passion, and some people whisper it. And your job is to hear it. And quarterbacks got all kinds of personal styles. And it's not like, well, if you're a screaming leader and you berate your players, or you charge them up, or you get them all fired up like General Patton, that might work. And then there are quiet leaders, and then there are leaders who just do it with a look. If it works, if you could pick it up in the environment and it's working, that's a leader.
I'm always reminded, as someone who has often been labeled as arrogant and egotistical. I love John Adams' response to that when someone accused him of the same two things. And he said, "Madam, you've mistaken my arrogance, or you've mistaken my conviction for arrogance and my passion for ego." So it is a fine line, as Jim's alluding to, that you've got to have that conviction, that passion, that energy, but obviously it's got to be in a way that people can understand it for what it is, and not just the, one-stop shopping, end all be all, I know, shut up and go down the road.
So as we wrap up here, saw a couple of questions come through, and I want to kind of channel them by asking you, given the framework that you laid out, do you have any predictions, right? Do you see any emerging stars, that you think are just around the corner because they've got the right system and they've got the right attributes? Or do you see any folks who maybe have had some success where you think, I don't know if they're going to be able to sustain it?
We're going to actually do one. The Q factor is taking on a number of different lives. The upcoming draft, which looks to be another interesting one, looks to be maybe another 5 guys, because you're going to have Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson and Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and this young man, Mac Jones. Again, 5 guys with all very dramatically different, some big schools, some small schools, some very good outside the pocket, some more pocket quarterbacks. So again, it's going to be an interesting litmus test, not only to see how they're looked at, but where they actually go in the draft and how they're valued. You talk about we wanting a more athletic quarterback, but last year, the number 1 pick in the draft, Joe Burrow, was more of a pocket quarterback. The number 1 quarterback in the draft this year looks to be Trevor Lawrence. Although he can certainly move, he's more of a pocket quarterback. Mac Jones is a pure pocket quarterback. Certainly Justin Fields and Trey Lance are guys that move around a little bit more active outside the pocket. Zach Wilson somewhere in between. So there again, we keep changing the criteria of what we look at as what a successful quarterback is. But year after year, again, we get another chance to try it out in the draft. And there's this diversity. One that I'm going to be, just to throw a name out there that to keep an eye on, is Marcus Mariota. This young man that I think has a legitimate. Remember, Ryan Tannehill goes to Miami, is a bust, first round pick, doesn't work, ends up going to Tennessee, and all of a sudden is successful. Again, the ultimate in what they were doing in Miami didn't fit his skill set. The running the ball, what they asked him to do, had a tremendous year, a couple of years now in Tennessee. Marcus Mariota has all the attributes. He's got the right mental attitude. If he can get with the right team, and it's very rare that a player will leave unsuccessful someplace and be successful going someplace else. You have the outliers like a Ryan Tannehill. I think a Marcus Mariota will be interesting to see if he gets that second opportunity. I'm going to watch very closely to see if indeed this environment is the key factor, or he truly just doesn't have the abilities to play.
Yeah, he'll be an interesting one to watch. Also, one of the things to look for in this upcoming draft is where the players end up. And it looks like Trevor Lawrence probably end up with the Jaguars, and as coaches has schooled me, that's probably a pretty good place. Got there's good coaching staff, good environment, and either Justin Field or Zach Wilson likely to end up with the Jets. And we're not gonna paint a bad picture there, but the track records have not been great of late. So, but it's a new set of coaches, so maybe that'll change. But it's like what we saw with Cleveland, who finally, after years of just not being able to, put one foot in front of the other, seem to have gotten straightened out. So but the Jets are right now, they're unfortunately the modern Cleveland.
Well, and as somebody from Queens, I resemble that remark. But I will say that that is where I think conversations like this are so important, in the sense that what I think happens in the fan community is that narratives around individual people get boiled down sometimes to observations that don't really impact winning. And when that conversation that starts with the fans and the media bleeds back into, operations and player personnel decisions, right? You get, a cycle where sometimes folks are reacting as opposed to having a strategy and actually putting the pieces in place to execute the strategy. Having high draft picks has dramatically changed the fortunes of a lot of franchises. You mentioned Troy Aikman. Well, the Cowboys over a certain period of time had a bunch of top draft picks, and they didn't miss on any of them. Yeah. And that set them up for about 6 or 7 seasons, right? So I would never count, this is the beauty of the NFL. I would never count out any franchise, but I do think, to your point, that landing in certain situations as a young quarterback can be more comfortable in certain places than in others. And I think,
I will say this, since you're a goddamn Jet fan, as they say. Joe Douglas, who used to work for me in Baltimore, is the new general manager, and Robert Saleh is the new head coach. Know both these individuals very well. The good news for the Jets is, for the first time in a long time, I think there's the potential to have a very clearly defined culture reset. And if they will go about doing the job the way I believe they will, and bring in the right players to fit that culture reset, then the Jets have a chance to make that transformation. Just like we talked about, Cleveland brought in a lot of good players, but it wasn't until they brought in Kevin Stefanski to reset that to where that marriage is truly what has taken the organization forward. And we'll see whether they can take the next step or not. But so there is some hope for the Jets in that, for the first time, in my opinion, in a long time, and not the least of which is the general manager and the head coach together, I think, will have a shared vision of what that culture is. I think one of the biggest problems with Jets is you had, between ownership, general manager, and head coach, you had too many different moving. They weren't as one, so to speak. I think you'll have that with the Jets now. And I think it'll be interesting to see. I'm going to be very interested to see if indeed they take a quarterback. I think will be very telling, whether it's Zach Wilson or Justin Fields, both good players, both good young men. Okay, so I'm not saying taking one over the other would be good or bad, but it will send a very clear signal when they choose one or the other, which is likely to be the case, as to the culture that they're trying to define.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough for spending the time with us. I hope the folks out there really enjoyed this conversation. I did tremendously. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, for being candid, for making us a little bit smarter.